Scene 3. A churchyard. In it a monument belonging to the Capulets. Enter Paris and his page, bearing flowers and a torch. Give me thy torch, boy. Hence, and stand aloof. Yet put it out, for I will not be seen. Yond yew trees lay thee all along, holding thine ear close to the hollow ground. So shall no foot upon the churchyard tread, being loose, unfirm, with digging up of graves. But thou shalt hear it whistle then to me, as signal that thou hearest something approach. Give me those flowers. Do as I bid thee, and go. Page. I am almost afraid to stand alone here in the churchyard, yet I will adventure. And he retires. Sweet flower, with flowers thy bridal bed I strew. O woe, thy canopy is dust and stones, which with sweet water nightly I will do, or wanting that with tears, distill my moans. The obsequies that I for thee will keep nightly shall be to strew thy grave and weep. The page whistles. Huh? The boy gives warning. Something doth approach. What cursed foot wanders this way tonight, to cross my obsequies and true love's right? What, with a torch? Muffle me, night, a while. And he retires. Enter Romeo and Balthazar with a torch, mattock, etc. Romeo. Give me that mattock and the wrenching iron. Hold, take this letter. Early in the morning, see thou deliver it to my lord and father. Give me the light. Upon thy life, I charge thee, whate'er thou hearest or seest, stand all aloof, and do not interrupt me in my course. Why I descend into this bed of death is partly to behold my lady's face, but chiefly to take thence from her dead finger a precious ring, a ring that I must use in dear employment. Therefore hence, be gone. If thou be jealous, dost turn to pry in what I farther shall intend to do, by heaven I will tear thee joint by joint, and strew this hungry churchyard with thy limbs. The time and my intent are savage wild, more fierce and more inexorable far than empty tigers or the roaring sea. I will be gone, sir, and not trouble you. So shalt thou show me friendship. Here, take thou that. Live and be prosperous, and farewell, good fellow. Balthazar says, for all this same, I'll hide me hereabout. His looks I fear, and his intents I doubt. He retires. Thou detestable maw, thou womb of earth, of death, gorged with the dearest morsel of the earth, thus I enforce thy rotten jaws to open, and in despite I'll cram thee with more food. He opens the tomb. Paris says, this is that banished, haughty Montague that murdered my love's cousin, with which grief it is supposed the fair creature died, and here has come to do some villainous shame to the dead bodies? I will apprehend him. Stop, thou unhallowed toil, vile Montague. Can vengeance be pursued further than death? Condemned villain, I do apprehend thee. Obey, and go with me, for thou must die. I must, indeed, and therefore came I hither. Good gentle youth, tempt not a desperate man. Fly hence, and leave me. I beseech thee, youth, put not another sin upon my head, by urging me to fury. Be gone! By heaven, I love thee better than myself, for I come hither armed against myself. Stay not, be gone. Live, and hereafter say a madman's mercy bid thee run away. I do defy thy conjurations, and apprehend thee for a felon here. Wilt thou provoke me? Says Romeo. Then have at thee, boy. And they fight. The page says, O Lord, they fight. I will go call the watch. Paris says, I am slain. If thou be merciful, open the tomb. Lay me with Juliet. And he dies. In faith, I will. Let me peruse this face.
Mercutio's kinsman, noble county Paris, what said my man when my betossed soul did not attend him as we rode? I think he told me Paris should have married Juliet. Said he not so, or did I dream it so? Or am I mad hearing him talk of Juliet to think it was so? Oh, give me thy hand. One writ with me, in so sour misfortune's book, I'll bury thee in a triumphant grave. A grave? Oh, no, a lantern. Slaughtered youth, for here lies Juliet, and her beauty makes this vault a feasting presence full of light. Death, lie there, thou there, by a dead man interred, laying Paris in the monument. How oft when men are at the point of death have they been merry, which their keepers call a lightning before death. Oh, how may I call this a lightning, O my love, my wife? Death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath hath had no power yet upon thy beauty. Thou art not conquered. Beauty's ensign yet is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks, and death's pale flag is not advanced there. Tybalt, liest thou there in thy bloody sheet? Oh, what more favour can I do to thee than with that hand that cut thy youth in twain to sunder his that was thine enemy? Forgive me, cousin. Ah, dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and that the lean abhorred monster keeps thee here in dark to be his paramour? For fear of that, I will still stay with thee, and never from this palace of dim night depart again. Here I will remain, with worms that are thy chambermaids. Oh, here will I set up my everlasting rest, and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars from this world-wearied flesh. Eyes, look your last. Arms, take your last embrace. And lips, oh, you the doors of death, seal with a righteous kiss, a dateless bargain to engrossing death. Come, bitter conduct, come, unsavory guide. Thou desperate pilot, now, at once, run on. The dashing rocks thy seasick weary bark. Here's to my love. Oh, true apothecary, thy drugs are quick. And thus, with a kiss, I die. Enter at the other end of the churchyard Friar Lawrence with a lantern, crow, and spade. Saint Francis be my speed! How oft tonight have my old feet stumbled at graves. Who's there? Here's one, a friend, and one that knows you well. Bless be upon you. Tell me, good my friend, what torches yond that vainly leads his light to grubs and eyeless skulls? As I discern, it burneth in the Capel's monument. It does so, holy sir, and there's my master, one that you love. Who is it? Romeo. How long have you been there? Full half an hour. Go with me to the vault. I dare not, sir. My master knows not, but I am gone hence, and fearfully did menace me with death if I did stay to look on his intents.
Stay then, I'll go alone. Fear comes upon me. Oh, much I fear. Some unlucky thing.
As I did sleep under this yew tree here, I dreamt my master and another fought, and that my master slew him.
Oh, Romeo! Romeo! Alack, what blood is this which stains the stony entrance of this sepulchre? What mean these masterless and gory swords, to lie discoloured by this place of peace? Romeo! Oh, pale! What else? What? Paris too, and steeped in blood. Ah, what an unkind hour is guilty of this lamentable chance. Oh, the lady stirs. Juliet wakes.
Oh, comfortable friar, whereas I to remember well where I should be, and there I am. Where's my Romeo?
I hear some noise, lady, come from that nest of death. Contagion and unnatural sleep, a greater power than we can contradict, hath thwarted our intents. Come away. Thy husband in thy bosom there lies dead, and Paris too. Come, I'll dispose of thee among a sisterhood of holy nuns. Stay not to question, for the watch is coming. Come, go, good Juliet. I dare no longer stay.
Go, get thee hence, for I will not stay, and I will not away. What's there? A cup close to my true love's hand. Poison, I see, hath been his timeless end. Oh, churl, drunk all, and left no friendly drop to help me after. I will kiss thy lips. Haply some poison yet doth hang on them, to make me die with a restorative. Thy lips are warm.
The first watches. Led by which way?
Yea, noise. Then I'll be brief. O happy dagger, this is thy sheath. There rust, and let me die.
Enter the watch with the page of Paris.
This is the place there where the torch doth burn.
The ground is bloody. Search about the churchyard. Go, some of you, whoever you find, and touch. Pitiful sight. Here lies the county slain, and Juliet bleeding warm and newly dead, who here hath lain these 2 days buried. Go, and tell the prince, run to the Capulets, raise up the Montagues, some others search. We see the ground whereupon these woes do lie, but the true ground of all these piteous woes we cannot without circumstance descry. We enter some of the watch with Balthazar. Here's Romeo's man. We found him in the churchyard. Hold him in safety till the prince come hither. We enter Friar Lawrence and another watchman. Here's the friar that trembles, sighs, and weeps. We took this mattock and the spade from him as he was coming from this churchyard's side. A great suspicion. Stay the friar, too. Enter the prince and attendants. What misadventure is so early up that calls our person from a morning rest? Enter Capulet and Lady Capulet and others. Lord Capulet. What should it be that they shriek so abroad?
The people in the street cry Romeo, some Juliet, and some Paris, and all run with open outcry upon our monument.
What fear is this, says the prince, which startles in our ears? The first watch. Sovereign, here lies the county Paris slain, and Romeo dead, and Juliet dead before, warm and newly killed. Search, seek, and know how this foul murder comes, says the prince. Here's a friar, and slaughtered Romeo's man, with instruments upon them, fit to open these dead men's tombs. Capulet says, Oh, heavens! Oh, wife! Look how our daughter bleeds. This dagger hath mistaken, for lo, his house is empty on the back of Montague, and it missheathed in my daughter's bosom. Lady Capulet. Oh me, this sight of death is as a bell that warms my old age to a sepulchre. Enter Montague and others. The prince says, Come, Montague, for thou art early up to see thy son and heir more early down. Montague says, Alas, my liege, my wife is dead tonight. Grief at my son's exile hath stopped her breath. What further woe conspires against mine age? Look, and thou shalt see, says the prince. Oh, thou untaught, what matter is in this, to press before thy father to a grave? The prince says, Seal up thy mouth of outrage for a while, till we can clear these ambiguities, and know their spring, their head, their true descent. And then will I be general of your woes, and lead you even to death. Meantime, forbear, and let mischance be slave to patience. Bring forth the parties of suspicion. Friar Lawrence says, I am the greatest, able to do least, yet most suspected, as the time and place doth make against me of this direful murder. And here I stand, both to impeach and purge myself condemned and myself excused. The prince says, Then say, at once, what thou dost know in this. I will be brief, for my short date of breath is not so long as is a tedious tale. Romeo there dead was husband to that Juliet, and she there dead, that Romeo's faithful wife. I married them, and their stolen marriage day was Tybalt's doomsday, whose untimely death banished the new-made bridegroom from the city. For whom, and not for Tybalt, Juliet pined. You, to remove that siege of grief from her betrothed, would have married her perforce to County Paris. Then comes she to me, and with wild looks bid me devise some mean to rid her from the second marriage, or in my cell there she would kill herself. Then gave I her, so tutored by my art, a sleeping potion, which so took effect as I intended, for it wrought on her the form of death. Meantime I writ to Romeo that he should hither come as this dire night to help to take her from her borrowed grave, being the time the potion's force should cease. But he which bore my letter, Friar John, was stayed by accident, and yesternight returned my letter back. Then all alone at the prefixed hour of her waking came I to take her from her kindred's vault, meaning to keep her closely at my cell till I conveniently could send to Romeo. But when I came, some minute ere the time of her waking, here untimely lay the noble Paris, and true Romeo dead. She wakes, and I entreated her come forth, and bear this work of heaven with patience. Then a noise did scare me from the tomb, and she, too desperate, would not go with me, but, as it seems, did violence on herself. All this I know, and to the marriage her nurse is privy, and if aught in this miscarried by my fault, let my old life be sacrificed some hour before this time unto the rigour of severest law. The prince responds, We still have known thee for a holy man. Where's Romeo's man? What can he say in this? Balthazar, I brought my master news of Juliet's death,
And then in post he came from Mantua to the same place, to the same monument. This letter he early bid me give his father, and threatened me with death going in the vault if I departed not and left him there.
Give me the letter, says the prince. I will look on it. Where is the county's page that raised the wretch, that raised the watch? Sirrah, what made your master in this place?
He came with flowers to strew his lady's grave, and bid me stand aloof, and so I did. Anon comes one with light to ope the tomb, and by my master drew on him, and then I ran away to call the watch.
This letter doth make good the friar's words. Their course of love, the tidings of her death, and here he writes that he did buy a poison of a poor apothecary, and therewithal came to this vault to die and lie with Juliet. Where be these enemies? Capulet, Montague, see what a scourge is laid upon your hate. That heaven finds means to kill your joys with love. And I, for winking at your discords too, have lost a brace of kinsmen. All are punished.
Capulet says, "Oh, brother Montague, give me thy hand. This my daughter's jointure, for no more can I demand."
Montague says, "But I can give thee more, for I will raise her statue in pure gold, that whiles Verona by that name is known, there shall be no figure at such rate be set as that of true and faithful Juliet. As rich," says Capulet, "as rich shall Romeo's by his ladies lie, poor sacrifices of our enmity."
The prince responds,
"Oh, glooming peace this morning with it brings. The sun for sorrow will not show his head. Go hence to have more talk of these sad things. Some shall be pardoned, and some punished. For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo." Exeunt. So there is the end of the play. And it's interesting to me, a couple things here, how the play ends with that phrase of Juliet and her Romeo. Notice that that's a reversal, right? Because normally we say Romeo and Juliet, but here it's Juliet and Romeo, so it reverses, right? It's another form of that inversion that occurs during the course of the play. Things being inverted from where they ought to be, the proper course of nature, the way that the human machine is built. And Shakespeare seems to be suggesting that in this struggle between the novelist, the realist, the masculine, the feminine, the Romeo and the Juliet, that the two things get reversed. Romeo becomes more feminine, feminized, effeminate, and Juliet becomes more, masculinized, perhaps. Even in their death, notice that there's a sort of flip or reverse that normally with this is strange, but in literature, normally women kill themselves by means of a potion, and men kill themselves by falling on their sword. And here we have a reversal where Juliet stabs herself and Romeo takes potion to die. So even there you have a flip. You have an inversion that occurs. Notice a couple of things as well here. And by the way, I apologize for the cutting out earlier of the video. That's what happens when you have a small phone with limited memory. But here we are. Notice a couple of things that happened earlier. Paris shows up in order to honor Juliet, which does convey the idea that Paris is actually a decent fellow, and he's concerned about the fact that this poor girl whom he seems to have loved to a certain degree, has died so young. And then he's concerned that this Montague fellow, this Romeo, has showed up to the grave to violate the corpse. What can that mean? Well, I mean, it could mean that that he's there to rob the grave. It could also mean something more sinister. I mean, necrophilia, for instance. That is, well, physical relations with the dead. And that nastiness, that sin, that perversion, is somewhat confirmed later on when Romeo kisses the corpse of Juliet, and then Juliet wakes up and kisses the actual corpse of Romeo. Certainly when I teach this to students, they look on to that of all the parts of the play, that element of the kissing of the corpse to them is most repulsive. And I wonder whether or not for Shakespeare's audience, it might have been repulsive as well. We moderns think of it as, oh, it's so romantic, you know, he's kissing her while she's dead. But I think perhaps for Shakespeare's audience, that idea might have been repulsive. This idea of kissing a corpse, right? Necrophilia, not a nice thing. But remember that in the sonnets that we looked at, that twisting of the mind that occurs due to unbridled lust makes one do things that are irrational, that are non-human, that are extreme. So here we are having Paris honoring Juliet, and Romeo, for all intrinsic purposes, violating the grave. He's there to crack it open with a crowbar, which is really extreme. And notice back in scene 3 that Romeo gives something which is normally cut out by most interpretations of the play because it doesn't sit well. He says to his man, Balthazar, that he is there to some degree to honor Juliet. He says, "Give me the light, and upon thy life I charge thee, whate'er thou hearest or seest, stand all aloof and do not interrupt me in my course." So no matter what you see, don't stop me from doing what I'm going to do. Because I descend into this bed of death to behold my lady's face. I'm going to go down into that grave in order to look at my dead Juliet. Partly. But mostly I'm going down into the tomb to take from her dead finger a precious ring that I must use in dear employment. What on earth is that? You know, what is Romeo saying? I'm breaking into a tomb in order to rob the dead? That's a very strange thing indeed, especially if we're reading this as a romance, right? Why would he be breaking into a tomb to rob Juliet of a ring? Well, maybe we could say he's robbing her of a ring in order that nobody finds out that they're married. But then he's going to kill himself as well down there. So it's a very, very strange line to put here into Act 5, Scene 3. And then he says to him, just, stand off and don't interrupt me in what I'm doing. But of course, the page, Balthazar, chooses to stick around and see what happens. And then Romeo encounters Paris. And Paris, what would he think? He sees Romeo coming at the grave with a crowbar, and he doesn't know anything about their marriage. And so what does he think? Well, here's this Montague, this rash, unbridled, ungoverned kid who killed Tybalt. What am I supposed to think as Paris? He's violating the tomb, right? He's breaking into the tomb, for goodness sakes. Well, Paris, being a decent fellow, said, I'm going to stop this guy. This is insane. Nobody does this. Now, I find it really interesting that Romeo, when he attacks Paris, he calls him, right, Mercutio's kinsman, right? He knows he's Mercutio's kinsman after he kills him. But he also says, you're an impetuous boy. Have at thee. He treats him as a child. Treats him as a child. And he says to him further on, he told me Paris, my man told me Paris was going to marry Juliet. Is that so, or did I dream it? Because it's almost like Romeo is in a state where all that previous stuff is like a dream. Remember in the sonnet that we looked at, that it talked about how the thing promised by lust unbridled is a dream that vanishes. And there's an element of this in this line. Did I dream it so, or am I mad? Hearing him talk of Juliet to think it was so. Remember again that the sonnet that we looked at talks about how it drives the person who accepts unbridled lust, the promise of unbridled lust. It drives them mad. So again, I think this play is embodying that element that we see in Sonnet 129. Well, then after Romeo drinks the potion and Juliet stabs herself, both very extreme, very rash, very ungoverned, everybody comes back on stage, all the players come back on stage, and you have a very, I think a very odd scene that Friar Lawrence comes back on stage, and he says first to Juliet before she kills herself that some greater power than we can contradict hath thwarted our intents. So it's almost like he's suggesting that God, a greater power than we, has intervened and thwarted our attempts to conquer death. Kind of prophetic. In ways it kind of echoes those science fiction stories where human beings try to master the universe and something steps in and goes crazy wrong. You know, like a Umbrella Corporation in Raccoon City, and all of a sudden you've got a zombie outbreak that occurs and everybody has to suffer and die. It's kind of like that. Some greater power causes our attempt to dominate the universe, causes it to go awry and go very, very badly wrong. So, but Friar Lawrence, when he's brought back on stage by the prince, I find this a very strange thing. This must be an element of Elizabethan theater, of Shakespearean theater, where they bring somebody else at the end of the play back on to recap what had happened, because Friar Lawrence basically tells exactly what happened previous on stage, and so everybody watching would know what had happened. So why does Friar Lawrence have to recap? Maybe because those who weren't paying attention. I mean, Elizabethan theater was very different than ours. People would talk and mill around and eat and scoff at the players during the course of the play. So they didn't sit quietly. It was a really rowdy affair. I mean, people chucking food on stage and yelling at the players. So maybe they needed Friar Lawrence there to tell everybody what the hell just happened, right? Here's the end of the play. What did you just watch? You know, I don't know, maybe. But barring that possibility, it may be that Friar Lawrence is trying to put in order what he just went through, and in doing so, to make an excuse for himself. If we read it that way, if we read that Friar Lawrence is not a nice character, that Friar Lawrence actually is a guy who's trying to play the role of God, he's trying to dominate the universe, this whole section at the end of the play of his retelling the story, he's retelling the story as he himself sees it. Not necessarily as it panned out, but as he himself sees it. And it's almost as though he was saying, I tried my best, but things just didn't work out, right? I writ to Romeo that he should hither come as this dire night to help to take her from her bowed grave, being the time the potion's force should cease. But he which bore my letter, Friar John, was stayed by accident, and yesterday night returned my letter back. Then I went to the vault, right, hoping that I could send Juliet to a convent and intercept Romeo. But then she waked, and I entreated her to come forth, but I heard something that scared me, etc., etc. So it's almost like Friar Lawrence is making excuses for himself, which contributes to the idea, if we wanted to make the case, that Friar Lawrence is not a nice fella, right? That he really isn't a hero of the story, but rather he is a flawed character who's trying to play God, to fix the universe. Well, then we end with the prince proclaiming one thing after another, which is a typical thing again in Elizabethan theater, where the authority figure comes in and tells us, it shall be so, it shall be so. But the prince does have one line in here which I find interesting. After Friar Lawrence's big excuse speech, the prince says, "We still have known thee for a holy man," which means we always have known thee for a holy man, right? The prince almost seems to be saying, well, we've always thought of you as a holy man, so this must be true. I don't know whether that suggests it, but I think it can be read that as though the prince is saying, you're really screwed up, Lawrence. We have before this thought of you as a holy man. We'll go with that. And then immediately says, where's Romeo's man? Where's Balthazar that he can confirm all that has just happened? The very ending of the play occurs again with this trope where the prince says, "For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo." And has that nice little couplet that wraps up the play, but also inverts Romeo and Juliet to Juliet and Romeo. And thus the play ends. And I go back again to the idea that what we deal with in Romeo and Juliet is not romance. Rather, it's another example of a piece of artwork that attempts to order the loves appropriately. And it orders the loves appropriately, ordo amoris, by showing us what lust unbridled looks like. Lust is the attempt to dominate the world, really. It's not, part of it is sexual, certainly, but it's really an attempt to dominate the world. And when it's unbridled, it looks like it does in Sonnet 129, with all of those adjectives that Shakespeare piles on of bloody and murderous and not to be trusted and extreme, etc., etc., etc. And I think that the play is really showing us that this way of living is not the way that we want to live. If we want an example of how not to live, it's Romeo and Juliet. So let's not be taken in hook, line, and sinker, right? And think that Romeo and Juliet is somehow an exemplar of romance or an exemplar of love. It isn't. It's a corrective. It's a caveat, right? It is the thing that says, don't do this. You see this, kids? Don't do this. Instead, we should be guided by the sonnet 116 that Shakespeare also writes in contrast to 147 and 129. And he says, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments, right? Because real love doesn't alter when an alteration finds. Real love does not bend with the remover, death, to remove. Real love ends up being an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempest and isn't shaken. It's a star to the wandering bark whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. It's not time's fool. It is something which alters not by the brief hours and weeks, but bears things out even to the edge of doom. That's real love, according to Shakespeare. Not this extreme, violent, perjured, not to be trusted love that we see in Sonnet 129, nor this fever that drives a person to madness as we see in 147. And as we read Romeo and Juliet, as we complete Romeo and Juliet, we step away from it thinking, or should be thinking, that's not how one should live, because that ends up in death and destruction. Now, I would also suggest, as one further thing to contemplate, that if that's the case, then that unbridled lust that sparks between Romeo and Juliet is like an unbridled lust that sparks when one adopts a worldview without the corrective worldview. If one adopts the worldview of nominalism only, without the worldview of realism, or if one adopts the worldview of realism without the corrective of nominalism, then we have difficulties, we have trouble. It's only when the nominalist and the realist come together with real love rather than lust that we get a balanced approach to the world, which is what Plato called justice, balance. Only then do we see the world correctly, clearly, and have the ability to endure through times of difficulty. Only then do we have the loves ordered correctly, so that the head rules the stomach through the chest. Intellect rules appetitive through the thumotic or high-spirited. Without that, we end up running aground, running a wreck, as Romeo and Juliet do, and end up kind of pathetic in a way. Because that's ultimately how I see Romeo and Juliet. They're kind of pathetic, tragic, in the real sense of the word. Well, thank you for joining me in this. This has been fun. And I'm wondering, what should I read next? Because I want to continue to read. I want to continue to read with you. Now, my preference is open. I'm thinking I would like to read the Wizard of Earth C series, but I'm open to reading other things. I mean, there is the Wrinkle in Time and The Wind Through the Door, Madeline L'Engle's great work. There's Frank Herbert's Dune that I like to read. It would be neat to read Watership Down by Richard Adams. Or we could read together The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. If you had an opinion about what should be read next, please let me know. Write it in the comments. I'd love to hear what you had to say. Again, as I said at the beginning of this previous video before I was cut off, if you've had an experience like I've suggested I've had in the last 20 years, since 2001, 911, let me know. I'd love to hear. How have you changed? How has the 20 years since that awfulness happened, how has it changed you? To give a plug for the Shakespeare 2020 project, again, check it out. It's really cool. Also check out the History of the English Language podcast. That's a really cool podcast to be part of. Go check out Dr. Arthur Hippler's lectures on the Screwtape Letters. They're a really good series to find on YouTube. And also check out this new band that I just found out about, right? Because they're really quite good. The Black Market Brass Band, a really good local band. So go check that out. All those things, keep you occupied, keep the mind fresh. There's more to life than the daily grind. As they say in Anti-Mame, life is a banquet and most poor suckers are starving. So enjoy the banquet. Oh, and if you like what I'm doing, go to my Patreon page. Any contribution is welcome. My family thanks you greatly. I thank you greatly. Check out my Patreon page. And until we meet again, which will be soon, my friends, stay healthy, stay safe. God bless.